Should I talk louder? What? Testing 1, 2. Testing. Testing 1, 2. Am I okay? Okay. I mean, I'm going to talk louder when I start talking, but I'm trying to be incognito right now. Are you all ready? I'm going to announce. It is a little nicer in here, more comfortable. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to our breakout session today. We are going to discuss embracing the most vulnerable, taking ownership of solutions. At the Policy Circle, we focus on solutions and how policy drives outcomes for our communities. But what about the most vulnerable in those communities? How do we ensure they stay at the top of our minds when we think about policy, when we talk about policy, when we are sitting in the rooms when policy is decided? My name is Crystal DeVos Mahaney, and I'm the policy writer and researcher for the Policy Circle. And I come at this from a different lens. I'm a special needs mom to a son with autism who also has 2 rare speech disorders, and I'm a military spouse of 20 years. So I pivoted into this world when my son was diagnosed, and I got to know the community and how welcoming it is, but also the barriers and the hurdles that we have to jump to get equitable education and whatnot, and we think about the future. So I'm thrilled to facilitate today's discussion alongside a fantastic panel of thought leaders on this topic, who are our boots on the ground, ensuring opportunities for the most vulnerable citizens. First, I'd like to welcome Vicki Sokolik from Florida, founder and executive director of Starting Right Now, a nonprofit organization whose mission is to end unaccompanied youth homelessness one child at a time. Vicki's work extends beyond this remarkable organization through her instrumental work in passing 10 bills in the state of Florida that protect unaccompanied youth, where she was also appointed by Governor Rick Scott to serve on the Council of Homeless Board and the Youth Independent Living. Next, I'd like to welcome Susan Swan Smith of Texas, director of My Possibilities Foundation, an organization that provides adults with disabilities a pathway to inclusion and a meaningful life. Her career focus has been in nonprofit fundraising and development, where she had the opportunity to lead North Texas Giving Day, supporting more than 3,200 nonprofits in North Texas in the community effort. And I read somewhere that you raised $375 million.
Over the 11 years.
I mean, still, that's amazing. That was quite a Tuesday. Also joining our panel is Larry Markle of Indiana, director of the Gregory S. Fairbox Center at the Ashkenazi Health in Indianapolis, an organization that provides college students with physical disabilities opportunities through paid internships and professional development with the goal of improving their employment outcomes. Larry's devoted much of his career focused on helping students with disabilities and was the 2019 recipient of the Association on Higher Education and Disability Meritorious Contribution Award. That was a mouthful. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to our panelists. So I'm going to do a couple rounds of questions. If you have a question, please don't hesitate to raise your hand. I kind of want this to be a little organic, a little conversational. If you have something that's relevant into whatever we're talking about, please don't hesitate to chime in and ask. Okay? So round one, Vicki, I'll start with you. Who does your organization serve, and what is the approach?
So, I don't know if this is on, do I need to turn it on?
It'll work. Just start talking. There you go.
I have a loud voice anyway, but, so we serve a federal term called unaccompanied homeless youth. It's a federal term meaning that a student is 15 to 19 years old. They're not living with their parent or guardian, and they're not eligible for foster care because they left home versus being taken from their home. And so they couch hop. They start asking friends at school if they can sleep in their house. Our kids get very creative. We've had kids who've hid, their friends have hid them in their closets. We've had kids, we had one funny incident where a student hid her friend in the back of her dad's car, not realizing that the dad had a 6 a.m. flight. And then when the dad was driving to the airport, the student popped up. They both had heart attacks. The kids get very creative of how they're going to hide and make sure nobody knows that they're a homeless youth. The sad stat is that almost 100% of our girls have been raped in their home. And so eventually after, a million DCF investigations, when nothing is done to protect them, they say, I'm out of here. We know that about 25 to 30% of the boys have been raped in their home. Boys are not as forthright with the information because they feel like they should have protected themselves, but the abuse and the neglect, it's horrible what these kids go through. Our kids are identified through the school district. We get a call saying that they have a homeless unaccompanied youth. We go in, we vet them to see, are they really homeless because they really can't live at home because home isn't safe, or are they homeless because they don't want to follow their parents' rules, because they won't last a day with me if that's the case. They have to really want this help. And then we actually are completely holistic to where we give them housing, academic support. We match every student with their own mentor, and so they get this reliable adult in their life that a lot of times builds a lifelong relationship. We help them plan if they're going to go to the military, vocational, or to higher education. We give them life skills classes, so our kids get anger management, mindfulness, meditation, boundaries class, literally everything, so that they leave us feeling very whole. And we are unique in that we stay with the student through their post-secondary education, even though they're not physically living with us anymore, so that we can make sure that they're actually getting to their career goal. So we're completely holistic, and the kids are amazing. It's interesting because I was talking to them about that they do disabilities, cognitive, physical. I would say that our kids have an invisible disability, but no different than any other disability.
Well, Vicki, I wanted to ask, you didn't set out to start an organization like this.
No.
How did this population come to your attention, and how did starting right now begin?
So I'll do the clip notes, but my husband and I were just helping families get on their feet with that had a high school student that we were finding in different motels. So this was kind of like normal for my kids, my biological kids, I call them, at home, to see that we were just helping these high school kids go off on their own. And it was his second day of senior year of high school. He came in while I was cooking dinner and said, there's a girl in my class who's going to be homeless. She can't live with her mom. She's afraid. Her mom's moving in. They're chronically homeless. Her mom's moving in with a man that she thinks will end up raping her. And so she's going to go live with her boyfriend. And at the time I said, oh, that's really sad. Honestly, did not even give it another thought. Finished dinner. The next day, my son came home and he's like, what did you work out for Amanda? And I was like, what?
That wasn't on the to-do list on the fridge.
And he was like, well, I wouldn't have said something if I didn't want you to help her. That night, my husband came home and Amanda and her boyfriend were in our house, and they were my first understanding of a homeless, unaccompanied youth. There were these two kids trying to navigate a system that they had no agency in.
Yeah.
And so we ended up helping them. After helping them and then helping a few others, I got a random call from the mayor of Tampa talked to me when we went in, and she asked, like, why is what you're doing working? And I said, we're not passing out money. We're like a concierge. We figure out what the kid needs, and then we're going around town.
Bless
I
you.
become a pariah at our grocery store because people knew that if they saw me, I was going to ask them to help with something. She said, if I helped you get a board of directors together, would you do this citywide? That was in 2007. We've helped about 350 kids go through our program. We've passed 10 laws at the state level. And the kids really changed my life more so than I changed them. And I'm going to give a shout out. Dominique is our assistant executive director, and she's changing lives. So.
Thank you. Susan. Oh, thank you. Susan, same question to you. Who does your organization serve, and what is your approach?
We serve adults with intellectual or developmental disabilities. We call them hipsters, hugely important people. And we serve from 18 to 99. Services are hard enough to find for children with Down syndrome or on the autism spectrum, but it's even harder to find them for adults. So our approach is not quite as holistic as yours, but it is to offer in a college-style setting academic, vocational, and independent living courses to provide counseling and therapy, a variety of things, and to help our hipsters move into the work world and provide coaching both to the hipster and to the company. So it's an interesting opportunity.
Thank you. So it's my understanding My Possibilities was started by three mothers who, probably no different than all the women in this room, wanted better education opportunities for their children, and they saw a need. Can you share some statistics around this community as far as education and employment?
There are 6.5 million people with cognitive disabilities in the United States. 800,000 of them in Texas, 260,000 right here in North Texas. 52% of those people leave high school without a diploma. And they're just, again, it's very hard. Most of cognitive disabilities want to live a meaningful life as much as any of the rest of us. They've got goals that they want to achieve, but they're often not listened to. So we serve those people through the HM public school system. 18% of people with cognitive disabilities have competitive employment. So that's not counting the folks who work in the sheltered workshop, but that's people who are actually out working for companies. And since you gave me the questions, I found a new statistic that's really interesting. 85% of adults with IDD are considered mildly impaired and actually are likely to be capable of meaningful work and or independent living.
Thank you. Larry, same question to you. Who does your organization serve, and what is your approach?
So we serve college students who have some form of a physical disability. So college students maybe with who are wheelchair users or some other form of mobility disability, blind, low vision, deaf, hard of hearing, some kind of orthopedic disability. College students, these are individuals who've met the same requirements to get into university, take the same courses, same degrees, etc., who happen to have a physical disability. We facilitate full-time
So my follow-up to you is the Gregory S. Fairbox Center is named after an Indianapolis attorney. Can you tell us a little bit about him?
Yeah, very dynamic individual. Greg Fehribach is a person with a disability, he's a wheelchair user. He's a very prominent citizen. What's called the United States Access Board.
If you own a business or you're a part of a business, if you can look at it and say, how can we invite someone with a physical disability to be a part of our team? It is not impossible because other companies do it. They're getting more interested to make those accommodations because they're federally protected. But a lot of companies, I think they get scared that they just simply don't know how to start. They don't know where to start, and it really just takes someone saying, okay, it's actually pretty easy, and this is how you do it. That was aggressive. Susan, I wanted to make a quick point that a lot of special education families, if you have a child with a disability, if they are put on alternative education standards by the district when they're in elementary school, if they continue on that track until high school, they may not be eligible for a standard diploma, which I'm sure you experienced too as well, Vicki. And what that just means that their trajectory as a student is isolating them at a young age. That means that once they get through the whole education system and say they do want to go to college or they do want to go to a vocational or just start working, that they're not able to because parents didn't know that they wouldn't be eligible for that standard diploma. And I work with tons of families and I say, listen, if the alternative curriculum is appropriate, okay. But let's work, no matter what, let's work towards a standard diploma because the ultimate goal is quality of life, employment, independent living. So I just wanted to make that point.
Well, I really should have mentioned that when I was talking. Inclusion is a big part of what we do. We do a lot of community-based instruction, and partly that's so our hipsters are exposed to the world we all live in. The other part of it is so our world is exposed to people with intellectual or developmental disabilities.
I think about that a lot with, my son is 11, he's gonna be 11 in a couple weeks, which blows my mind. But I think about the chances for him to get in a general education setting in elementary school is not only setting him up for success to create peers, but for his peers to have interactions with him and to be quite comfortable. I'm a child of the 80s. We were not educated in the same room with anyone with handicaps, which was what it was called then, right? So we didn't have that experience growing up, whereas inclusion is so, it is, for a lot of districts are moving more towards inclusion, appropriate inclusion, that is the whole, it's not just assimilation, I don't mean to use that word, but it's the integration of the disability community into the general education population. So. Vicki, I want to direct a question to you. You encountered laws and policies that kept your students from taking the next step in their life, like getting an identification card or accessing their social security numbers to secure financial aid. How did you tackle those barriers for you students?
So our very first, one of our young, like in 2009, we had a student who joined our program. At the time, he was 17, and his parents would not give him any of his identification. The mother claimed she burned it. And so without identification, really he couldn't get a job. And we couldn't prove who he was to start the application processes for college. And so when he turned 18, which was like maybe, I don't know, 5 months after he came into our program, we had gone to Social Security office to try to get a Social Security card, and we were told we needed his birth certificate. Well, he wasn't born in the state of Florida. He was born, at the time he told us, in New York. And we started doing vital check for New York. But every time we were putting in the information on the computer to get his birth certificate, it would pop up with a little screen saying, information doesn't match. And so I kept saying to him, like, do you not know how to spell like your father's last name or something? Like, what's the problem here? We ended up having to have our mayor call the mayor of New York to say, hey, we need this student's identification. He's literally dead-ended without it. Turns out he wasn't born in New York, he was born in Rochester, but even at that, we couldn't get it. And so it turns out that we end up on the phone through, our attorney ended up calling the governor. We ended up on the phone with a person in the health services, and she says, if you can give me all the identification on your birth certificate, we'll release it to you. Well, he starts going through all the identification, and they're like, sir, that's not your father's name. And here is this kid learning over the phone with me that that's not his dad. And he, turned to me and was like, oh my God, my whole life is a lie.
Yeah.
Well, we ended up getting a senator to sponsor one of his bills, and for us to go testify before the House of Representatives to prove that here were these kids who were not living with their parent or guardian, but had no access to any of their legal documentation. And that law was passed unanimously. And so now, if you are a homeless unaccompanied youth in the state of Florida, you can actually access your own birth certificate, your own social security card. And then as I kept working with kids, we realized that we had a student who had torn his ACL on the football field at the high school, 17 years old. Mom would not sign anything for him to go to the doctor or to get surgery. This kid was in mega pain. So all of a sudden I realized our kids cannot access Medicaid because the way the law was written, you either had to have a family, be in a family, or be disabled. And so I said to the same senator that helped me with the first law, what you're saying to me is, get all your girls pregnant, have your boys cut off a limb. I mean, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And so we were able to testify and get Medicaid law changed so that now unaccompanied youth in the state of Florida can get Medicaid independent of their parents. And we were also able to amend the law so that if you are 16 years or older, you can actually be sent for your own medical care, and psychiatric care, and drug rehab. We went through a whole plethora. And so we just kept building on laws. This recent legislation just had a law passed that if you are an unaccompanied homeless youth, you can get your driver's license without parental consent. The state will actually pay for your insurance and a card, getting you through driving school. And they have just now opened to where all colleges, we just had this law change, all colleges now have a district liaison on their campus in the state of Florida for homeless students, because first-gen homeless students really struggle. So we're just continually changing the laws to make sure that the kids that don't have, they literally have no agency now do in the state of Florida.
It is interesting how the law gives parents so much, and then as soon as the child turns 18, but that's not really the reality of so many kids. Vicki, I wanted to turn to you. In addition to the education and career skills, My Possibilities identified another huge need for the intellectual developmental disability community in creating first of its kind, and this is big, not 375 million big, solution for housing for these individuals. Can you tell us about this project?
I'd be delighted to. That we're building a residential community in a suburb of Dallas, which will have 300 homes, and 100 of them will be designated for individuals with IDD. We'll actually manage a lot of them ourselves. They'll either be or with contractors. They'll either be small group homes or independent living homes. And then the other 200 are going to be available to the public. So it will be a very inclusive community. We'll offer programming there and transportation to My Possibilities and things like that. It's not an easy thing to do. Talk about barriers. I mean,
Yeah.
building any development is difficult. Just working with a governmental agency, but we've had some resistance from neighbors and homeowners associations, and we've been. Is it working out? Okay. We've been working hard to work with them.
Mm-hmm.
We really hope, again, that we build understanding. We also, frankly, this will be another revenue stream for My Possibilities. And we won't make a lot of money off it, but this is a for-profit organization that we are aligned with. We feel that philanthropy alone cannot meet the gap between what Texas funds for people with disabilities and what it actually costs. So our executive director, who's very innovative, we look for a number of other revenue streams. So this will be one. We do some social enterprise work, some other things like that.
Well, and that's an interesting point. Like in education, it's very difficult to assess what education costs are for each individual student. I made the assumption that if a child is in a wheelchair, they are a high cost, high need student, right? Through my research on my second thesis, I was dead wrong. My student with autism is actually a higher cost, higher need student than a student in a wheelchair. And the reason a student in a wheelchair, you got a one-to-one. That's a one-to-one. Whereas my son needed behavioral intervention, speech intervention, sensory breaks, occupational therapy. He needed so much overlay for him to have a successful day. And that's even before he can have a chance to learn. So that's the higher cost need, but since it is so individualized in the public school system, that it is hard to assess that cost. So my question, I guess, follow up to that is, how do families get to be a part of that community?
Well, that's a very good question. And another statistic I wanted to share was that only 17% of parents with adult children with IDD have any sort of plan for their child's care or financial underpinning for their child's care after they've passed away. So for this community, actually, you can be part of our program, a hipster, or you can just be somebody else with an interest. You could have an adult child with an intellectual or developmental disability, or you can just want to be part of the community. You have to connect with My Possibilities, but that's the only requirement.
Well, it kind of sounds like one of the big takeaways for that is for folks who are in the community, say if you're on the city council or if you go to city council meetings or you sit on the board and you get the folks that are not in my backyard folks who are going to protest things like this or even put barriers up or try to deny access to this community, is you can say, hey, this is possible. And like, I love that the panelist earlier today says shame the community into doing the right thing, because we can do that. Because if the not in my backyard is just a continuation of the old school thought of separate is, like, we know that separate is not equal, then we have to get past that mindset in order to really get to the inclusive living portion of it. Larry, this is going to probably be one of my favorite parts, is the storytelling aspect. So can you share a couple stories of students that have participated in your program?
I could share a lot of stories about students
sure.
that participated in our program. I'll share two briefly. One, because you mentioned Rose-Hulman Institution. Rose-Hulman is one of the top engineering schools in the country, and we've had interns from Rose-Hulman. And we had this woman with cerebral palsy, ambulatory, she walks, but cerebral palsy. She got an electrical engineering or mechanical engineering degree. I'm not an engineer. One of those two, I promise. From this incredibly prestigious school, she couldn't find a job because of stereotypes that people have, maybe for a woman engineer, but certainly for a woman with a disability who's engineering. Interned in our program, interned twice in our program after graduation to get those kind of experiences, hit a home run. Got hired she's working now at the place where she did her second internship as an engineer and doing great work. The second is a woman who lived in the county outside of Indianapolis, wheelchair user, who interned at Eskenazi Health and was fantastic with her internship. But the first time she interned, she couldn't get transportation. Accessible transportation between counties is difficult in most places. She couldn't get transportation, so there was this elaborate scheme that was worked out. Essentially, she was leaving home before 6 every morning to get to an internship, not getting home until much later because of the woes of public transportation. You talk about dedication, and she was terrific in her job. We were fortunate. We got some grant money, got an accessible vehicle, etc. She's able to get to and from the job. Anyway, she gets her degree at the community college, realizes because of the interactions that she's having, I can get a 4-year degree as well. She gets her 4-year degree. As of 2 weeks ago, she's a full-time employee, making a really good salary, working in a position that you need a 4-year degree to have, that she was able to do because of the internships that she had. But the transportation woes were worked out. If I could finish, I know we're probably past time. There are significant barriers in place for individuals with disabilities. Those have been discussed previously. Let me just mention a couple things quickly. Transportation is a huge barrier. Accessible housing, big barrier. For people who need assistance getting out of bed in the morning, bathing, toileting, etc., those are tough jobs. And with the change in employment in the last few years, a lot of people that were working those jobs are not working those jobs any longer. So like we often say, you could be the best employee ever, but if you can't get out of bed, you're not going to be able to do the job. So finding good attendant care is a major barrier. There's several others as well. Last one I'll mention, for individuals who are blind, visual disabilities, or even hearing disabilities, technology, which is a great boon for people with disabilities, can also be a tremendous barrier as well, because if websites and such weren't designed to be accessible for people with disabilities, if your application is online and somebody who's blind that uses screen reading software can't access the job application, you may be losing a great possible employee because that person can't apply for the job.
Yeah.
Rant over, sorry.
No, it's okay.
Can I rant for just a minute?
Yes, please.
That I would, you're absolutely right about all of those things. And I would add to it, funding is critical, at least here in Texas. We're 48 out of 50 states in terms of what we provide for people with disabilities. And the regulations around what kind of assets people with IDD can have. It really restricts how much they can work, because if they have too much money in their bank account at the wrong time, they can lose their benefits. And I think the third thing, and this is really improving, but is for all the organizations working so much on diversity, equity, and inclusion to move toward considering disabilities part of that inclusion. And we work with 100 different employers now, so that really is changing, but it hasn't been part of the landscape.
I actually taught a class, not to toot my own horn, but I taught a class on disability as a tenet of diversity. And I very poignantly said, if you are talking about diversity and you do not include disability, you are doing it wrong. You're doing it wrong. So, Vicki, one last word. What is the one thing that anyone in this audience can take back to their hometown to be aware of or to contribute to your community?
Well, I think identifying unaccompanied homeless youth is really hard. The kids don't want to be found. They're afraid of the consequences for their families. They're afraid of the consequences for themselves. They're so worried they'll be thrown in foster care. Their other siblings will be taken away from their own in foster care. Working with the school districts to make sure that they have an identification process, I think, is key. There's one she was leaving school every day and going and having survival sex, which was her only option. As a 17-year-old, she had no other asset but her body. And so if you just think about what these kids have to do to survive, we need to protect them.
There you go. So I think the takeaway from that is ask your school board, how do you identify unaccompanied youth in your school board? And just start there. Just ask, a lot of it is just ask the question. So thank you so much for being here. If you want to stick around and commiserate, please do. Thank you, thank you.